Many cheaters do not understand the real price of their betrayal. For many, it is a small affair, entertainment and nothing more. But they can't even imagine what a devastating blow this can be for many people. The consequences are devastating. The gentle tap on my shoulder stirred me awake. Initially mistaking it for my wife's touch, I soon realized it was late Monday afternoon, and the tapping belonged to someone else. Turning over, I found Verena Jefferson beside me, the wife and co-owner of the antique shop where I had recently purchased some furniture. She greeted me with a smile. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," she whispered. "It's past 4 p.m. My husband will be back soon, and I need to reopen the shop." I jolted up from the old sofa. "Verena, Not now, dear. Take a quick shower. Can't have you going home all steamy to your wife, can we?" "Verena, please listen." "No, not now. I have to get to the front before my husband returns. After you're dressed, slip out the back door. See you Thursday. Don't forget." With that, she shut the door to the back room and hurried out to the storefront. Oh God, I thought. What have I gotten myself into? All I had wanted was to surprise my wife for her birthday. Marcia loves antiques, and the Jefferson shop had exactly what I was looking for. An old set of chairs, a love seat, and 2 chairs that appeared to be centuries old. I have to admit that Verena was special. About 5 feet 2 inches tall, with short black hair, dark skin. She looked about 40, and she smelled fantastic. She completely charmed me. It was only the second time I had been to their store. Last week, I came in and noticed 2 chairs. Verena mentioned the same sofa they had in another place in a small warehouse. She was incredibly charming, if I may say so. Those eyes of hers, so captivating. She smiled at me, took me to the back room to show me a photo, and before I knew it, I was at the sofa, and then on an old double bed. I'm not sure if I should tell you what happened next. You know the saying. A person doesn't have enough blood to control both heads. It's either one or the other. Later, I picked up the chairs and loaded them into my Ford Explorer. However, she informed me that the love seat still needed some additional repairs and suggested I return again. So, I did. Yet again, the love seat was not ready. She got me a second time. Now I'm expected to return once more on Thursday. I can't keep doing this. Verena seems to think I'm her playmate, but if I don't go back on Thursday, I won't get the love seat. And if I do go back, what should I do? I'm happily married. I'm Catholic. I love my wife, Marcia, and we have 4 kids. I've been as faithful as an old dog, at least until now. What do? I need to get home. The journey was lengthy and monotonous, starting from the city where Jefferson's shop was located, then along the freeway, onto the interstate, and finally, Route 12 to our neighborhood and house. My mind was preoccupied. What should I do? Sooner or later, Marcia would start to suspect something. I felt awful. What's happening to me? I'm a good guy. I have a wonderful wife and a bunch of amazing kids. Marcia is truly the best. Marcia has always been unique. I can't just say I met Marcia and fell in love. I discovered her, almost accidentally. I had to convince her to even consider going out with me. Marcia was raised strictly Catholic, one of 6 siblings who had chosen a path of religious service. When I first met her, she was already well into her 2-year candidacy with one of the region's orders. If I had been a few months later, she would have been a novitiate, and I would never have had a chance. I stumbled upon her one day purely by chance. Was it good luck? Bad luck? No, it was the luckiest stroke of fortune. Looking back, what an incredible twist of fate. No, it felt like a true miracle. Somehow I ended up with her phone number. I can't even remember who gave it to me. I was 21 and still in college. I dialed the number. We talked, we exchanged calls. She seemed really kind, gentle, not my usual type at all. But, well, I fancied myself a bit of a Romeo, and I prided myself on my conquests. She seemed like an easy target. I remember her mentioning she had just finished high school and was preparing for a life of service. At the time, considering who I was, I took it as something like she might be considering a career as a girl of easy virtue. We agreed to meet at a roundabout at the end of a bus route near her place. I drove there, saw her, and almost immediately had doubts. I pulled up, honked the horn, got out, and opened the passenger door. She got in. But as soon as I sat back down and took a good look at her, I realized this was a huge mistake. She had a severe cleft lip. As I pulled away from the curb, even now I can vividly recall wondering, how the hell do I get out of this? We didn't get far. My awkwardness and her self-consciousness took over. She asked me to pull over. I did, and she jumped out of the car, starting to walk, then hurriedly scampering along in that clumsy way girls in long coats do. At first I felt relief, but then came something else. Regret, remorse, guilt. I hastily exited the car, nearly having my door torn off by another driver. I sprinted to the sidewalk and yelled, "Hey, wait up!" She was already running. I caught up to her, grabbed her shoulders, and turned her around abruptly. In a voice that was oddly high-pitched, I blurted out, "Hey, wait." "What?" Damn, she was crying. Unsure what to do, I pulled her into a hug. I still remember thinking as I squeezed her slender body close, "Damn, she's as flat as a board." I recall she squirmed, but I held on. I placed my hand on the back of her head and she became still, rigidly so. She was so small. That was our first encounter, and looking back, it was over 15 years ago. Since that initial meeting, our courtship has been one of the wildest imaginable. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. There was something there, someone, that I needed, that I had to have. I yearned, I pursued, I chased, and I begged. She had parents. Oh boy, did she have parents. 4 older brothers, an older sister, grandparents, an entire extended family, all fiercely protective. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined it. It took months, a long, exhausting campaign, but I finally got her to the altar. That's a whole different crazy story, and I don't want to dwell on it now. My stomach is in knots. I've broken my most solemn vow. She'll know, she'll figure it out. I know she will, she'll see it. I'm done for. God, what a fool I've been. I arrived home, pulled into the garage, and checked beneath the tarp where I'd hidden the chairs to ensure no one had peeked. I had cautioned Marcia not to look, but children, driven by curiosity, often can't resist. I adjusted the tarp slightly and then walked towards the house. Our garage is connected to the main house through the laundry room, a small foyer, and then the kitchen. Inside, I heard Marcia softly singing, possibly an ABBA song. The scent of something delicious filled the air, perhaps spaghetti or lasagna. The house felt warm and inviting, just as it always does. The essence of a true home. Marcia turned towards me as I entered. She held a plate of her homemade lasagna, looking beautiful in brown culottes, a white apron tied with a bow, a beige blouse buttoned up, her hair in a ponytail, and delicate hands with clear nail polish. She rarely wore makeup, not needing it. Her long lashes framed bright green eyes. Her red hair accentuated a perfectly heart-shaped face. Her lips were slightly pursed as she smiled, the faint cleft barely noticeable to me. "Almost ready. Salad's already on the table. Garlic bread is just about done," she said, placing the lasagna on the counter before coming over for a kiss. I leaned over to her. No perfume, no deodorant, just soap and Marcia. She's so petite that even though she was standing as high as she could, I still had to bend over for a kiss. "It smells good," I said. "I just took a shower," she replied. I froze. Could she understand that? No, she meant that she had just taken a shower. I grinned. "No, the food." She took a step back. "You're a fool." I was referring to myself. "And remember, I taped our show last night. After dinner, we'll put the kids to bed and curl up and watch it." The fire was turned off. She reached for the food, but I grabbed her hands, twisted them behind her back, and turned her to face me. I saw her shining green eyes, fluttering eyelashes, and quarter-carat emerald earrings in her perfect ears last year's Christmas gift. Her long, slender neck, a necklace with a golden crucifix. "I need another one," I whispered. "I need a kiss." She bent down, her warm lips gently touched mine, her slender fingers stroked the back of my head. Her eyes, full of love, captivated me. Then she said, "Let go of my hands. You're hurting me." I kissed her again. She repeated, "Let go." I let her go. "You're so sly," I said. She tossed aside a stray strand of her amber hair, grabbed the plate again, and pushed me aside. "Don't be so weird. Take the garlic bread and bring it here," she said, and swept past me into the dining room like a hummingbird. Just as I reached the oven, the kids came barreling in. Jamie was first, 14, intellectually ahead of his years, a natural leader built like a horse. Second came 10-year-old Wilson, followed by 7-year-old Alan, a clone of his older brothers. Last in was 5-year-old Meadow. The boys all resembled me, big, solidly built with brown hair. Meadow, on the other hand, took after her mom, tiny, with red hair, freckles, and a shy demeanor. As usual, I pushed past the boys and scooped up my daughter. "How's my baby today?" She wrapped her arms around my neck, nearly choking me. "I love you, Daddy." Looking around, she added, "Did you bring me anything?" I hugged her tightly. "Hey, you've got me." She gave me a kiss. The boys rushed to the table. Wilson shouted, "Come on, let's eat." Jamie pulled him back. "Mom first." We all stood by and waited for Marcia, queen of the realm, to take her seat. It was like this every night. The boys were rambunctious and loud, while Meadow was quiet and, like her name, soft and gentle. Everyone knew she was sort of my favorite, but no one minded. After all, I had my boys. They were there for me, like their mom. Mine. Little League baseball, soccer, lacrosse, roughhousing with our dog. I was the dad. Oh, dog, I almost forgot. We have a yellow Labrador named Brandy. Technically, Brandy belongs to Marcia, but I'm the one who always takes her to the vet, cleans up after her in the yard, and walks with her when she leaves. Brandy is 7 years old. We all sat down at the table, listened to Mom say a prayer, and then started eating. Marcia is an amazing cook, the best of all. God, I love her so much. I looked from her to our boys. How could such a girl raise such big children? I thought about Verena. What an old hag she is. How could she? Who was I? After dinner, we helped the children with their homework. I helped Meadow write down her words, and Mom helped the boys with math. We sent the children to bed. Marcia and I got a job watching Our series. It was another calling card movie. What else could a woman who almost became a nun look at? We spent 2 hours cuddling on the couch. After the movie, we went to bed, but there was no talk of intimacy. By 11 o'clock, Marcia was already curled up asleep. I was lying with my arms around my beloved and looking at the ceiling. I had to call Verena. No more need. I meant it. Nothing more. I woke up early and headed straight to the office before going to court. I was involved in an important case where a toddler, the child of an unwed mother, had been mistreated during a medical emergency. The hospital thought they could avoid responsibility, but they were wrong. This was a significant case with a lot of money at stake. I'm not an ambulance chaser, but the hospital was negligent, and they deserved to be held accountable. The mother and her child deserved justice. I knew that the local radio hosts would criticize it as another frivolous lawsuit, but they weren't the ones affected. It wasn't their child. Besides, they all had insurance. This poor mother had nothing until our law firm stepped in. The pundits could complain about rising insurance premiums, hospital shortages, and high malpractice fees, but that mother and her child had rights. After my day in court, I tried calling Verena, but it went to voicemail. I wanted that love seat, but I certainly didn't want another encounter with her. I had a wife and family, And I was a happy man. Verena was a mistake. We were in court again. We're going to win this case. Last night with Marcia was incredibly special. Was I good enough? How could I be? I was married to a man who adored me. What was wrong with me? I was tormented by feelings of guilt and shame. Why did I lose my way? Her bright green eyes looked up at me, softly glowing as she purred and whispered, "I love you so much." My first thought was, and I took a chance on this. I rolled over on my side, pulled her to me and hugged her tightly. I whispered back, "I'm so lucky. Oh, how I love you." It was so nice. I felt incredibly strong, domineering. Then she whispered, "When you're like this, when your arms are around me, I feel so protected." At that moment, I felt like a fool. No, as a king, a mighty ruler. We lay quietly side by side for almost an hour. Those were her moments. She treasured them, and so did I. Two heads close to each other, foreheads touching, hot breath, lips on lips. Oh, despair. Other thoughts came into my head. Shame. I have disgraced this woman, this girl who was everything I ever wanted, everything I ever dreamed of. I can't risk losing it, ever. Oh, the agony. What a shame. Disgrace. I needed to confess. I couldn't get through to Verena. Guess I'll make myself clear when I go to pick up the love seat tomorrow. I lifted the love seat. Glancing at my watch, it was 3 p.m. and I still hadn't arrived in Verena. I parked behind the antique shop, exited the car, and made my way to their rear entrance. I tapped on the door. A gentleman arrived at the door and asked, "Are you Gary Blackwell here to pick up a love seat?" "Yes, that's me," I replied. "The Jeffersons aren't here, but they left us to assist you with the piece." Another man entered carrying my love seat, asking, "Where should I put it?" I guided him to the back of my vehicle, opened the hatch, and he loaded it in. The first man approached with a clipboard, saying, "Please, sign here." I signed and thanked him. As I headed for my driver's door, the second man interjected, "Oh, one more thing." He punched me in the stomach. The other man grabbed my tie, slammed me against the door, and restrained me by pulling down my sports coat. In a calm voice, he said, "Mr. Jefferson has a message for you." Using my tie and collar, he struck my head against the car door repeatedly. Meanwhile, the other man punched my chest, cracking a rib. I collapsed to the ground. The second man delivered a hard kick to my kidneys. The first man intervened, pulling the second man away. "No, we're only supposed to rough him up a bit. Give him the envelope." The second man tossed a manila envelope at me as the first opened my car door. They pushed me inside, and the first man ordered, "Now get out of here." I was overwhelmed with nausea, a splitting headache, and my heart racing. My clothes were torn, and I had wet myself. Without hesitation, I inserted the key, started the SUV, released the emergency brake, and peeled out. I drove as fast as possible, escaping the alley and speeding down the street until I felt I was safely away from those men and their shop. Finally pulling over, I gasped for air as I opened the manila folder. No, God, no. I should have known better. A shop like that in that part of town. It had to be monitored. Mr. Jefferson had the entire place, including the back room, wired with surveillance. I stared at the damning evidence of myself and Verena Jefferson in a compromising position in the photo. Deeper in the envelope, a DVD confirmed my worst fears. How could I have been so foolish? I slumped against the steering wheel and wept, muttering, "This can't be real. What was I thinking?" Then a horrible realization struck me. What if... Oh, no. Please, no. I had to get home. Marcia, what would I tell her? She'd never... Oh God, my kids, my wife, my family, everything was ruined. Please, let this be a nightmare. I drove home as fast as I could, desperately trying to come up with a story. Maybe I could say I was at a 7-Eleven and was attacked by carjackers. That might explain everything. Pulling into the garage, I took a deep, painful breath and entered through the laundry room, trying to ignore the smell of roast beef. My favorite dinner, knowing it didn't matter now. Look at what I've done. As I entered the kitchen, Masha noticed me immediately. She hurried over, exclaiming, "Gary, what happened? Let me take your coat." Turning towards the dining room, she called out, "Jamie, Wilson, get in here right now." In an instant, my two eldest boys were by my side, helping me up the stairs. Alan stood at the doorway, wide-eyed, while Meadow, behind him, looked frightened. Marcia, close behind the boys, demanded, "Who did this? I'm calling the police." I muttered, "Carjacking, don't bother." Silently, my boys guided me to our bedroom. Marcia rushed to the bathroom to fetch towels. She instructed Jamie, "Downstairs, lower the oven temperature. Get your brothers and sister settled in the living room." Thank goodness for Jamie, I thought. Marcia pulled the covers over me. "Let me take care of you. Where does it hurt? Looks like you took a beating." "Gary, we need to get you to the ER." "I'll be fine. Just need some rest." She looked at me skeptically. "Gary, oh Gary. For a car? You could have been killed." Kneeling beside me, tears in her eyes, she whispered, "That was so reckless. Oh, sweetheart. Oh, my darling." She pressed her hand against my cheek and kissed me. I felt terrible. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I heard it. Marcia heard it too. Downstairs, one of the boys must have opened it. A moment later, Jamie shouted from downstairs. It was some man. He left a folder. He said it was for you, Mom. Marcia stayed close by me and called down, "Did you thank the man? Bring whatever it is up here." I winced, not from the pain. Marcia gently wiped my forehead, saying, "Oh, sweetie, we need to get you to the hospital." Jamie entered with the folder and handed it to his mom. I knew what it was. Inside, my mind screamed, "Put it down! Don't open it!" Marcia seemed to sense my thoughts. She placed the envelope on the nightstand. I breathed a sigh of relief. If she didn't open it, if she left it there, maybe I could retrieve it later. Marcia leaned in, her hand soft against my cheek. She kissed me. "You try to stay comfortable while I take care of the children. I'm getting you to the hospital." As she turned to leave, her gaze returned to the envelope. "It's addressed to me," she noted, lightly touching it. "Looks official." I wanted to cry out, "Stop!" She picked it up again and headed towards the door, opening it as she walked. Calling downstairs to Jamie, she began, "Jamie, I'm—" Her voice trailed off mid-sentence, the envelope open in her hand. She turned back to me, frozen in place, a look of disbelief on her face. I knew. "Marcia, My wife silently closed the bedroom door behind her. She sat down at the foot of the bed and nervously played with the envelope in her hands. Her expression was not one of anger or tears, just quiet sadness. Her face drained of color, she whispered, "Who is she?" "Nobody. She's the woman from whom I bought the chairs and love seat, I mean." She didn't say anything more, but her gaze shifted between me and what now felt like my own condemnation. Despite the pain in my side, I stumbled towards her and held her tightly. It was a mistake. I made a mistake. Marcia didn't resist. She murmured, "She's old. She looks old." Finally, she looked up at me and asked, "Gary, why?" I tried to sound comforting, but it fell flat. "I don't know. It just happened." Marcia rested her head on my shoulder and then leaned back, still looking at the unsettling pictures. "We need to get you to the hospital." Without meeting my eyes, she stood up, opened the door, and called downstairs, "Jamie, I'm taking Daddy to the hospital. Be strong and take care of things while we're gone." She moved to her dresser, put the envelope in the top drawer, and turned to me, taking a deep breath. "Please, get dressed. I'm taking you to the hospital." I felt completely lost. This was Marcia in her caretaker mode. "Honey, Please. She didn't look at me as she headed towards the door. I'll be downstairs, she said softly, slipping through the door, leaving it slightly open. I dressed quickly and followed her downstairs. The journey to the hospital passed in silence. It was well past midnight by the time we returned. I had a cracked rib and a few minor bruises, nothing serious. When we got home, Jamie was still awake, but the others were all in bed, though not necessarily asleep. In the living room, Marcia tousled our son's shaggy head and remarked, "That's my boy." I chimed in, "Good job, now off you go." Before leaving, Jamie asked, "You okay, Dad?" I assured him, "I'm fine." He glanced at his mom. "And you?" "Go to bed, Jamie. School tomorrow," Marcia replied. Marcia volunteered at St. Timothy's, our children's school. We chose it because it was one of the few co-ed parochial schools nearby. She played piano and assisted with the preschoolers. Looking up at me, she said, "You should go to bed too. I'll join you later." I needed her company. "Marcia?" she insisted. "Just go to bed." She didn't come upstairs. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen already busy packing lunches, preparing for the kids, and frying eggs for me. As I walked in, she handed me a coffee, set a plate of fried eggs on the table, and asked, "How's the case going?" Taking a sip of my coffee, I replied, "Good. I think we'll win." Then I inquired, "Any plans for today? Besides school, I mean." Leaning against the sink, she said, "I think I'll visit Mom and Dad later." I struggled to maintain composure, though inside, I winced. Marcia's father was Captain Keith Fitzgerald, a retired policeman. Two of his sons had also pursued careers in law enforcement. Her mother embodied the archetype of an Irish housewife. They cherished all their children, but Marcia held a unique place in their hearts. Born last in their family, a late-in-life baby, arriving a bit prematurely and with her special difference, she was seen as their gift to God, until she chose to marry me. They had been kind to us, especially to me. They loved our children just as dearly as their other grandchildren, yet Marcia's decision to marry had disappointed them, albeit mildly. I sensed their underlying resentment towards me, her father's distrust, her brother's and mother's polite tolerance, only her sister, and now this. I murmured, "Darling, perhaps—" "No," she interrupted. "I need to visit Mom and Dad." "All right," I conceded. I spent the whole morning in court in a fog. My colleagues noticed, but that wasn't my only concern. She was consulting her parents for advice. I prayed fervently. Nonetheless, I had to strategize, had to come up with something. When I arrived home just after 6 o'clock, I brought flowers. Marcia had another roast cooking in the oven. It was evident she had been crying. Upstairs, the kids were either doing homework or playing, I hoped. Marcia attempted a smile and asked, "How was your day?" "We got them," I replied. They know too. They'll keep fighting, but now it's a matter of how much and for how long." "Gary," she said. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Would you mind if I slept downstairs for a few nights?" "Oh, Marcia." "No. I need to be alone. Away from everything. I have a lot on my mind." "I'll sleep downstairs. You keep the bed," I offered. She hesitated, then said softly, "No. It's the bed. I need to sleep downstairs." "Okay, if that's what you need," I agreed. "I do," she affirmed. Dinner that night was quiet and subdued. The kids sensed something was amiss. Meadow's eyes were wide and filled with concern. The boys glanced between me and their mom, unsure. Marcia spent that first night on the living room sofa, and the next, and the next, and the one after that. Each dinner grew more awkward. I felt helpless, but I knew I had to do something. I spent Saturday afternoon driving to Marcia's parents' house. When her mother saw me, she disappeared into the kitchen. Mr. Fitzgerald invited me into their dining room and asked, Well, Gary, what have you got to say for yourself? She told you, I replied. He nodded. Mr. Fitzgerald, I made a mistake. I can't explain it. I can't wrap my head around what I did, but I know it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt her. I just don't know what to do. His face betrayed no emotion, but then unexpectedly he said, She's been to see a lawyer. No, I mean, She couldn't. Quietly, her dad responded, Gary, she's a mess. I've never seen her like this. Divorce is not. But her lawyer mentioned something called a separation agreement. You would move out. I was speechless, devastated. Not Marcia, not my Marcia, not this. Mr. Fitzgerald, I need your help. Tell me what to do. His response was cold. You should move out. I could tell he was on edge. One wrong word and I'd be on the floor. I'll do whatever she wants, but You've got to know. It'll never happen again. He gritted his teeth. Emotions seeped through like cracks in a crumbling wall. Looking down and barely audibly, he muttered, Never do it again. Then looked up at me with an old despairing stare. You've broken her heart. To her, you were... He shook his head. Go. Just get out. Go home. Yes, sir, I said. I got up, turned for the door, and stepped outside. Mrs. Fitzgerald was waiting for me on the porch. She came over and touched my arm. Never one for words, she started. Gary, Marcia, never. It's her, the story, You weren't like other, people. You were, and she. Oh, Gary, you know what I mean. She was shaking, tears dripping down her face. Gary, you. Go home, Gary. Marcia's just, you have to fix this. I understood what she meant. I walked down the steps, got into my car, and thought back to that first time. I recalled Marcia. That initial moment, I remember I didn't find her attractive, not at all. That lip, her nose, it was all off. I held the back of her head in my hand. I used her hair to lift her head up. Green eyes, red hair. No, she was pretty, very pretty. If it weren't for that damn lip. Her left lip. Yeah, that was the issue. That angry red line from her lip to her nose kept drawing my gaze, pulling me away from everything else. The freckles, the cheeks, her hair. My God, that hair and those eyes. I tore my gaze away and met her eyes. Christ, she was looking at me and she knew. So you're Marcia. She started to squirm again. All right, you've had your look, now let me go. No way. You remember my name? Gary something. Blackwell the creep. She squirmed harder. I didn't release my grip. Yeah, that's me, Gary the creep. So when can I take you out? I thought, am I out of my mind? She really struggled then. If you don't let go, I'll scream. Still holding on, I said, I can't do that. How about agreeing to let me take you to McDonald's? We'll grab a burger or something. That's the least we can do. We'll chat a bit, then I'll drop you off, so what do you say? Why would you even do that? You can see. I loosened my grip a bit and she seemed to relax. Yeah, I can see, but on the phone, when we talked, I thought we clicked. She responded, That was a mistake. I got angry. I remember thinking, what the hell? If any of my friends saw me with her, damn. I said, I'm not asking you to marry me. It's just a burger, for God's sake. She flinched. You're not just a creep, you're a foul-mouthed creep. She had me there. I was probably the worst person to be seen with her. It wasn't just about being seen with her, but her being seen with me. I truly felt like scum. Looking at her and her looking at me made me realize what a mess I was. I said, okay, I apologize, I used a bad word. So how about it? Just a soda, that's all. Then I'll drop you off. She relented. Okay, just a soda. I escorted her back to my car. my mind filled with thoughts of my close friend, nearly my best friend, who had recently died in a car accident. He had been driving a Stingray, ran a red light, and crashed into a utility pole, causing the car to explode. His body was badly mangled. I had been one of the pallbearers at his closed casket funeral. But it wasn't his death that occupied my thoughts. Rather, it was something else I had agreed to. My friend had a girlfriend who loved him deeply, but he had gotten her pregnant. She wanted to marry him instead of having a termination of pregnancy, but he hadn't given her a clear answer. Instead, he sought advice from me and our friends. We made a pact that if he refused her and she persisted, we would all claim we had slept with her. My friend believed this would make her back off, fearing she would be seen as promiscuous. At that time, no one thought about DNA tests. It was 1998, and we were naive. He even assumed that she might do something terrible to herself out of grief. In his mind, either way, his problem would be solved. But then he died unexpectedly. That was the kind of person I used to be. Someone who would lie about a decent girl to protect a problematic friend. But that was 1998. Now, older and wiser, I found myself walking this girl, whom I disparagingly called a hair-lipped skank, to my car so I could take her to McDonald's. I specifically said McDonald's so we wouldn't have to leave the car. I didn't want anyone to see me with her. Damn, if it had been 1998, I might have laughed at her and mocked her, maybe even made her cry. Perhaps I would have done that just a few months ago. But now? Maybe not. So we went to McDonald's. Later that afternoon, back in the present. When I arrived home, Marcia was in the kitchen. There was a scent in the air, maybe oysters. I entered and immediately sensed she knew I had visited her father. I took a seat. I saw your dad. I know. He called me. I didn't realize you had consulted a lawyer. Marcia sat quietly for what felt like 10 minutes, appearing tearful, yet composed. Finally, she said, I spoke with Helen. They have a spare room if you need it. You want me to move out? Helen's place is nearby. I could drop the kids off there. You could visit when I'm out. My foolish pride kicked in. No, I think I'd rather... Marcia cut me off. No, Helen's place is good. You'd be close if I or the kids needed you. I might visit sometimes. It would be good for Helen, too. I got it. I wasn't completely out yet. I said, well, Helen and I have always had a good relationship, and since Brian passed away, she's been mostly on her own. I suppose I could go there and still be available here if needed. Helen was Marcia's closest sister. Her husband Brian had died of Hodgkin's disease some time ago, and she was still grieving. She had a young son, Marion, just under 5 years old, a sweet kid who missed his dad. Feeling uneasy, I added, Marcia, we don't have to do this. Can't we? She cut me off, saying, no, this is for the best. You should go to Helen's. When do you want me to leave? After dinner tonight. What about the kids? They already know. She had already told the kids. What if I stayed tonight and left after Mass tomorrow? No, tonight. I needed support. I needed someone to talk to. I needed advice. I guess that settles it, I said. Marcia stood up and went to the skillet on the stove. We're having one of your favorites tonight, fried oysters. That's how I felt, fried. And oysters, of all things. That's nice. The dinner was solemn. No one spoke. After we finished eating, the children vanished. Marcia must have instructed them to disappear somewhere after the meal. I cleaned the skillet while Marcia loaded the dishwasher. I felt compelled to speak. Marcia, it didn't mean anything. I know. Honey, she meant nothing to me. I don't know how it happened. It was just meaningless. I can't explain it. You've already told me. Sweetie, do I have to leave? Do I really have to leave? Yes. Marcia, please. Helen's is a good place. I stood there. I couldn't cry. I wouldn't cry. I refused to cry. And then I started to cry. Marcia finished loading the dishwasher. You should pack your clothes now. I've washed everything. Don't forget your toiletries. Helen knows you're coming. Oh, and leave your house key on the table. My house key? Just leave it on the table. You won't need it. Besides, you know where we keep the spare key outside in case of an emergency. But my house key? My key? Just leave it. What choice did I have? She had me. She had evidence. I hadn't denied anything. She wanted me gone. It made sense. The kids needed her more than they needed me. All I did was pay bills and play with them. She wasn't divorcing me, not exactly. Just a separation, time apart. I would be cut off. Not from intimacy, it didn't matter, but from her, from my children, from my life. This couldn't be happening. But it was. After dinner, I left. The initial days were difficult. As I drove away, I thought, she said I could still visit each evening, but I couldn't stay for dinner. I could come either before or after. I chose after, hoping maybe we could, but it didn't work out. Marcia just retreated to her room whenever I was there. Those evenings were tough. Meadow would cry when I arrived and cry again when I left. Jamie wouldn't speak to me. Wilson and Alan followed his lead. After a few times, the boys started going upstairs with their mom, leaving just me and Meadow. How many times can someone watch Frozen? Helen was kind to me. She was lonely herself. Her little boy needed company. She offered me a spare bedroom. Brian had been a good provider. She had life insurance, no mortgage, and excellent health care. With her part-time job and Social Security for Marion, Helen managed. With me around, she had extra help at home. Worried about Marcia's potential reactions, I was cautious with my money around Helen, though I did contribute. The days dragged on. Helen and I talked quite a bit. Well, she talked mostly. She didn't ask many questions, but shared a lot. She mentioned Marcia was leaning towards a legal separation. Helen said, Marcia couldn't understand my actions and cried almost constantly. We discussed other things, too. Marcia was the youngest of 6. Before Marcia, Helen had been the baby. Marcia's unexpected birth, along with her disability, had unsettled the Fitzgerald household. Initially, Helen told me she had resented her new sister. She had been the baby until suddenly she was just another toddler. One night, as Helen and I passed the time, she confided in me about what had happened. Helen believed her parents harbored guilt, initially about having what they perceived as one child too many, but more profoundly about their last child being born with severe deformities. Helen later came to understand that her parents had never wanted Marcia, and when she was born, her condition was devastating. I had seen the pictures before, but Helen showed them to me again. They were heartbreaking, my poor Marcia. Helen also shared other revelations with me. Despite Mr. Fitzgerald being a policeman and their having excellent insurance, it never quite covered all the expenses. The family had been managing well with 5 children, but Marcia's arrival brought unexpected challenges, particularly financial ones. Helen mentioned various medical options for Marcia's surgeries, each presenting stark choices. One option promised a better outcome, while another was less favorable. The deciding factor always seemed to be money. The Fitzgeralds were forced to make agonizing decisions, and Marcia was just a baby, born prematurely. There were never any guarantees. And now here I am. At work, the case with the single mom and her toddler was progressing smoothly. The rest of my workload wasn't too demanding. I couldn't sleep. When and where would I be served? What would I do? Would she actually go through with it? Marcia, for goodness sake. She wouldn't appreciate that, using the Lord's name like that. What am I doing? I spoke with a friend who had experience with such matters. He wasn't much help. He said no matter what, I'd face public humiliation. He cautioned me that if Marcia served me at work, it would be disastrous. Around that time, Helen approached me wanting to talk. It was a tense conversation that consumed my thoughts for days. Helen caught me in her laundry room fixing a clogged S-trap. "Gary, can I ask you something?" I stopped immediately. "Sure, anything." "Other than that time, at the antique shop, had you ever done anything, "No, Helen, never. I never even considered it." "Then why, Gary?" Suddenly I felt uneasy. Was Helen asking on behalf of Marcia? Surely she was. I stood up and set the pipe wrench down. For some reason I was frightened. What could I say? What if I said the wrong thing? I knew I had to be honest. If I lied or said something foolish and Helen told Marcia, she'd find out. I don't know why. I truly don't know. I suppose I could blame fatigue or stress from work, or maybe being upset about something, but none of that would be true. Actually, I felt quite content, even somewhat cheerful that day. Was the woman some sort of temptress? No, she was entirely ordinary. On the street, I wouldn't have given her a second glance. I do recall thinking about how Marcia would like the chairs. Then suddenly, she was there, and it happened so quickly. Believe me, Helen, if I had known, if I had an explanation, I would... Well. Helen shrugged. Okay. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Oh, and thanks for fixing the S-trap." With that, she walked away. Reflecting back now, I think about Marcia and me, our courtship, that first date. Marcia had been quite ordinary, too. Well, there was that noticeable lip, the ugly red line, and her nose that didn't quite, well. Our first outing wasn't exactly a proper date. We went to McDonald's that day. We ended up talking for over an hour. Once I got past her issue, Marcia turned out to be really fascinating. Despite her challenge, she had a delightful, melodious voice, kind of chirpy like a hummingbird. She dropped a bombshell on me, saying she planned to become a nun. Being Catholic and having been around nuns, I never really thought of them as real people. They seemed either closed off or overly sentimental, though that might have just been me. Part of me could picture Marcia as a nun. It would spare her the complexities of dating and relationships. But that day, another part of me felt she'd be wasting herself if she chose that path. Even then, dense as I was, I could see a potential mother in her. We chatted, and instead of just dropping her off, I offered to take her home. Big mistake. The Fitzgeralds had a strict schedule, and Marcia was running late. Stupidly, I walked her to the door. She reached it, and her dad opened it. Mr. Fitzgerald swung open the door, smiled at Marcia, and gave me a menacing glare. He looked at her and said, "You're late. Who's this?" On my first visit to their house, I discovered Marcia had a mischievous streak. She grinned at me, glanced at her dad, and replied, "He's the reason I'm late." Shit, I thought, expecting the worst from her father. But to my surprise, he smiled at Marcia again, glared at me, and said, "Thanks," before slamming the door in my face. Well, shit, I thought, but just as I turned around, the door swung back open. It was Marcia. She reached out, grabbed my arm, and started pulling me inside, saying, "This is Gary Blackwell. He took me to McDonald's." That's when I realized she had brothers, 4 of them, all bigger than me, and I'm not exactly small. As Marcia dragged me in, she introduced me to her dad. I shook his hand. Ryan, Robert, John, and finally Stephen, whose handshake was the most intense. I knew my place had been firmly established. Then I met Helen. Perfect, I thought, as I willingly shook her hand. While her brothers scrutinized me, her father casually dismissed me with, "Nice to meet you, Gary. Come back sometime." I retorted, "I will. I was actually going to ask Marcia out, but..." Did I make a mistake? Dad looked furious. The brothers seemed ready to attack, but Marcia was glowing. Despite my harebrained move, she gave me a stunning smile and said, Call me later." To provoke her father and brothers further, I smiled back. "Later tonight?" She smiled again. "Same time as usual." As I walked away, the old man asked, What's this usual time? I remember skipping back to my car along their path. Was I being foolish? Get a grip. Helen was speaking again. We were now in her backyard, and I was sharpening her lawnmower. How many times did you, go? Oh, that, I thought. Twice. I visited twice. That's the worst part. The first time scared me silly, and the second time I thought maybe I could. Helen's expression was devastating. She looked like Marcia did the night of the photos. Helen, help me. I don't know what to do. I love her so much, I just wish. She's really hurt, Gary. It's like everything has changed, she said, staring at the mower. You don't have to do that. I put down the file and paused. Helen, you've got to help me. She gazed out at the grass. Marcia's my sister, my little sister. Then she looked at me, her expression serious. You really messed up, Gary. You don't understand what you've done, you just don't know. She turned and walked away. I got served at work. I was supposed to bring my lawyer for an arbitration meeting at the end of the month. I didn't even have a lawyer yet. I tried calling Marcia, but she wouldn't pick up. Jamie answered. He told me her lawyer instructed her to tell me to call him. I reached out to Marcia's lawyer. He wasn't helpful and said I should have been aware. I called my coworker who had warned me, and he connected me with someone. Arbitration? We arrived at her lawyer's office around 10 a.m. I hadn't slept, exhausted from too much coffee with bags under my eyes. A typical display of fatigue. It had been a while since I moved out with only 3 suits now worn out. I'd started layering shirts and had only brought 4 ties. Socks and underwear were another story. Marcia used to handle those. I couldn't ask Helen, and she didn't offer. I knew I needed a haircut. My beard was growing out. I'd quit drinking when I married, but recently started again, losing nearly 10 pounds, making my clothes fit poorly. At work, silence followed the news of my move. They'd all met my wife. I'd become the office outcast. Finally, my lawyer and I arrived promptly at their office, only to be kept waiting in a conference room for 30 minutes. It seemed deliberate. I was a lawyer, after all. Then, Marcia and her lawyer entered. My stomach churned. Nerves spiked. I expected Marcia to look as worn down as I felt, but she appeared stunning. In a lime green mini dress that matched her eyes with a matching jacket, 2-inch heels, and hair styled in a casual pixie cut. She looked incredible. She'd gained a bit of weight, wore subtle makeup, and had her ears pierced with jade earrings shaped like crescent moons. What a transformation! I was speechless. She looked like Emma Stone. No, even better than Emma Stone. Despite my lawyer's warnings, I couldn't help myself. My God, Marcia, you look beautiful, I blurted out. She blushed but said nothing. Her lawyer, a distinguished older man known for his prowess in cases like ours, smiled at me. We were there with an arbitrator, a woman who had come with my wife and her lawyer, which wasn't a good sign. The arbitrator smiled at me and my lawyer, saying, "This is an informal gathering. We're here to discuss Mrs. Blackwell's desire for a formal separation agreement. Are we all in agreement on that?" My lawyer nodded. Yes. I stupidly interrupted. Marcia, can't we just go somewhere and talk? The arbitrator cut me off. That's what we're here for. And then turned to my wife and her lawyer. Would you like to begin? My wife's lawyer started. Mrs. Blackwell is seeking this separation agreement because, since his adultery, she feels uncomfortable around her husband but isn't sure if she's ready to consider divorce yet. I felt like I was dying inside. Divorce, he had said it. He noticed but continued. Mr. Blackwell has caused my client immense suffering and pain, and severe emotional torment. He's breached their marital contract, inflicted incredible grief on Mrs. Blackwell, and neglected his parental responsibilities. My lawyer smiled and nodded, but I interrupted. Wait a minute, I didn't... My wife's lawyer cut me off. Have you had any intimacy outside of marriage? Yes, but you moved out of the house. She asked me to. The arbiter glanced around at each of us. My lawyer, my wife, her lawyer. Is this all accurate? My lawyer nodded. I tried again. Yes, but, The arbiter waved me off, turning to my wife's lawyer. You're seeking an indefinite separation? At least 6 months, he confirmed. I exclaimed. 6 months. Marcia started to say something, but her lawyer placed a hand on hers. It could be longer. My client needs time to decide. I'm a lawyer myself. I knew the rules. It didn't matter. I jumped up from my chair. No, Marcia, come on. I was fidgeting, not sure what to do with my hands. I reached out across the table. Marcia! She backed away. My Marcia backed away from me. The arbiter tapped her fingernails on the table. Mr. Blackwell, please sit down. My lawyer tugged on my coat sleeve. Gary. Tertiary. I looked pleadingly across the table at my wife and her lawyer. Honey, Marcia, avoiding my gaze, finally said softly, Sit down, Gary. I reluctantly sat down. Marcia's lawyer continued, We're willing to allow reasonable visitation with the children and open to counseling. We propose 5 sessions. I was aware of the terms. My lawyer had already briefed me on them. 5 sessions were the minimum, typically signaling a resolution was near. My lawyer smiled again. We were thinking 10. Her lawyer returned the smile. 5. The arbiter chimed in. Based on my notes, 5 sessions seems appropriate. If circumstances change, we can always add more. Her notes, I thought. This wasn't arbitration. It felt like a setup. I glanced at my lawyer, silently pleading. Ignoring me, he said, Okay, 5. And that was it. We settled on the standard visitation schedule, 1 night a week and alternating weekends. I would continue covering all expenses. Child support wasn't formally discussed, it was assumed. Marcia received an increased expense allowance, justified by social costs like babysitters, clothing, cosmetics, and gas. When I questioned the need for this, her lawyer hinted she might need to socialize occasionally. Socialize? Was she planning to leave me? I'd like to start these counseling sessions soon, I said. When can we begin? Marcia had been looking at me, but at my words, she turned away, addressing her lawyer quietly. I'd prefer to wait. The arbiter seemed concerned. We usually prefer to move forward promptly, but if you need... My wife interrupted. I need time to think first. Maybe in a few weeks? A few weeks, I exclaimed. Marcia, it feels like I've been away from home forever. I want to come back. The arbiter turned to my lawyer and then to me. I think we'll let Marcia decide on the timing. I looked at Marcia, trying to appear as pitiful as possible. Marcia, please. She refused to meet my gaze. The arbiter glanced between Marcia and her lawyer. Let's take a 10-week break. I have a list of reputable counselors you can review. Once you decide, we'll set a schedule. My lawyer finally spoke up. 10 weeks is quite long, and typically both parties participate in choosing counselors. The arbiter looked at Marcia. She vehemently shook her head no. The arbiter smiled and addressed her. There's room for compromise. How about a 5-week break and you can choose the counselor? Marcia still shook her head. The arbiter suggested, 8 weeks then? Marcia looked at her lawyer and then back at the arbiter, never at me. She nodded in agreement. The arbitrator leaned back. That settles it. A break of 8 weeks while Marcia reviews and selects the counselor. Marcia tapped her manicured fingernails on the table, a rare sign of agitation for her. No, I'll start interviewing counselors after my 8-week break. I fought back tears, but before I could speak, my lawyer interjected, That sounds reasonable. Mr. Blackwell will cover the counseling setup costs through my office. With that, the arbitrator rose from her seat. Well, I believe this went smoothly. My wife and her lawyer stood shaking hands with the arbitrator. Then Marcia's lawyer shook hands with mine. We'll be in touch." Turning to leave, my lawyer smiled and replied, "No rush." "No rush?" I thought, bewildered. "I just want to go home. I want my life back. What's happening?" Marcia and her lawyer exited through a side door. As they left, I called out, "Marcia, can't we—" My lawyer took my arm. "Not now, Gary. Let things take their course. It'll work out. You'll see." We left the office. My lawyer headed to his Escalade, while I made my way to my Camaro. Funny how things with the cars went. Before Meadow, we had a Malibu and a BMW. But when Meadow came along, we needed more room, so we got an Expedition. Marcia didn't like driving it, being short and uncomfortable, so we switched to an Explorer. Then Marcia wanted something sportier, so we got her a Camaro. The boys, preferring independence, took the bus, but now with me gone, her dad said Marcia needed the Explorer to shuttle them to sports. I wondered how that was going. Soon came my first visitation on a weeknight. Marcia didn't even look at me. She went upstairs. The 5 of us sat at the dining table. I tried to engage the boys in conversation about school, sports, video games. Nothing worked. Meadow was the only one who engaged. We talked about her writing and dance lessons. After about an hour, Jamie signaled his brothers, "Dad, we have homework," and they vanished upstairs. I lingered a bit longer with Meadow, but it was futile. My first official weekend didn't turn out any better. I arrived at what was supposed to be my house at 10 a.m. on Saturday. They were ready and off we went. I tried to make the most of the limited time we had. We went out for lunch at McDonald's and then caught a movie. Later that afternoon, we returned to Helen's, had dinner, watched some TV, and got the kids ready for bed. The next morning, Jamie informed me they needed to go home to prepare for Mass. I offered to take them, but Jamie declined, saying it was his mom's responsibility and that I wasn't supposed to be involved. So the weekend had turned into a disaster. Even Helen's son Marion seemed to be the only one enjoying himself. Meadow was gloomy and uncommunicative. I eventually gave up and said, "Maybe next time." None of the children responded. I dropped them off at home before 9 so they would have time to prepare. The following weeks followed a similar pattern. The kids were polite and well-behaved, but it was clear I was becoming an outsider. I was even losing Meadow. Something was happening. I didn't know what, but I couldn't believe Marcia was turning our children against me. Yet I was uncertain. What should I do? While attempting to sort things out, I spent considerable time reminiscing. During the initial phases of our relationship, Marcia wasn't exactly everyone's ideal. Certainly not mine. I liked her well enough, but love? Not quite. Nonetheless, I continued to date her exclusively from our first outing. At the time, I thought I was using her to enhance my image, dating this plain, unremarkable girl to appear gallant in others' eyes, especially girls. Surprisingly, it worked. Yet, I remained faithful to her, perhaps out of pity. Moreover, as I was completing law school, I needed time to study. There existed a kind of symbiosis between us. I would stay in, studying for the bar, while she engaged in her religious activities at home. We would either be at her parents' place or at my apartment, both immersed in our pursuits without much real communication. It was oddly satisfying. Her quiet demeanor was something rare in a young woman. I recalled our first official date vividly. I had arranged tickets for a play downtown. Little did I know her mother had taken her shopping for a new black dress earlier that day. Her first, as I later found out. She seemed so young. My plan was set: visit her home with flowers, play the chivalrous gentleman, take her to dinner and the theater, and ensure she was home early so I could head out later for my own amusement. But as usual, plans don't always unfold as expected. Everything was going smoothly until a reckless driver caused a massive pileup on the interstate. Although my car remained untouched, I found myself stuck in a long line of vehicles. Without a cell phone at the time, I had no means to warn Marcia ahead of time. I didn't arrive at her house until an hour after my scheduled pickup time. It turned out to be Marcia's first real date ever, something I only found out years later. Anyway, when I got there, although she was home, she stayed upstairs. I had 4 brothers and a father eyeing me like they were ready to pounce. I explained what had delayed me. Thankfully, there was a big traffic pileup on the news. Her mom called up to her to come down, but Marcia claimed she was feeling sick. It was obviously an excuse. There I was, in their living room in a suit with a bunch of cheap flowers. I grinned at Mrs. Fitzgerald and said, "Man, I'm exhausted. How about a cup of coffee?" She hurried to the kitchen while I casually strolled over to the dining room table, followed by the 5 Fitzgerald men. And there we all sat for nearly an hour. I wasn't about to leave. Marcia eventually came downstairs, dressed in an old, oversized blouse and corduroy pants that looked like they belonged to one of her brothers years ago. Her eyes were still a bit swollen and red from crying, even after all that time. I knew she must have been upset, imagining her first real date and thinking I might stand her up, which I later found out was exactly what she had feared. I stood up and said, "Well, come on, let's go." She looked surprised and replied, "It's too late now. We can't go out." I handed her the flowers, carnations, not roses, for a first date with someone like me. I reassured her, "We missed the play, but Sleepy Hollow is showing at the mall. We'll catch a movie and grab pizza afterward." And that's exactly what we did. Later on, I didn't regret missing the play. I had managed to get tickets to see The Phantom of the Opera. I was young and not exactly the brightest. We were leading the charge at work on the hospital case, and my workload was quite light, lighter than usual. One afternoon, senior partner Delbert Clausen called me in. "Gary," he began, "once we wrap up this hospital case, we want you to take some time off." I was taken aback. "Why? Is everything not going well?" He replied, "You're performing excellently, better than ever, but we feel you could use a break. Go on a trip, buy some new clothes, get some sun. We understand it's been tough with the workload and personal matters. We just need you operating at your peak." "Is it that bad?" He smiled. "Yeah, and we've got a couple of big cases coming up soon. We'll need you ready." So I agreed to take some time off. Before leaving, though, I tried harder to mend things with my wife and figure out what was going on with my kids, especially the boys. Nothing seemed to work. I attempted to take them to the movies, but they weren't interested. Even Meadow showed no enthusiasm. Something was amiss. I decided to wait a few days and kept trying, calling repeatedly, but hit a wall each time. Once my part of the hospital case was wrapped up at work, I took 3 weeks off. I planned for 2 weeks in the Bahamas and returning for the 3rd. Jamie's birthday was approaching. I wish I hadn't gone, but then again, the Bahamas were pleasant, but not for me. There were girls in bikinis, parties with drinks, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcia. I kept recalling memories from our past. I thought back to the time when I began to realize that Marcia was more than just the urchin I was carrying around. I had been dating her for several weeks without much thought. I could take her to a movie, buy her popcorn, put my arm around her, feel good about myself, like I was doing something charitable for a disadvantaged person. Then go out with my friends later, pick up someone else and satisfy myself. Yeah, that's how it started. Pretty crappy? Probably, but she didn't know. And even if she did, so what? All our dates were essentially undercover. I think she caught on. At first, she was always excited, thinking she was going out with a real stud, a good-looking guy. But eventually, I realized she knew we weren't going anywhere. It was all a facade. I can't remember if it was her or me, but I decided to step it up a bit. We went bowling. Honestly, she had bowled before, but only with her girlfriends during the afternoons. It was a whole different experience with me. She had friends, sure, but they weren't genuine friends. People can be cruel. They did things together, beach trips, sleepovers, parties. Helen told me about this. Marcia's friends were nice to her individually, but when it came to anything involving boys or social activities, she was excluded. Beach trips, pool parties, sleepovers, none of them included her. Helen once told me Marcia even tried to organize her own sleepover, but one by one her friends found excuses not to come. Hearing that, I thought I was a jerk. I think bowling was Helen's suggestion. I picked Marcia up at the usual time, and she asked, "What movie are we seeing tonight?" I grumbled, "No movie tonight, we're going bowling." It was like I'd proposed marriage or something. She exclaimed excitedly, "Bowling, wow, I don't have any bowling shoes." I replied matter-of-factly, "We'll rent some." And so off we went. Later I realized why bowling was significant. Marcia had never met any of my friends, so I thought bowling followed by a cheap burger and Coke, and meeting a few of my friends at the alley could be a good idea. We bowled a couple of games. I was a gentleman and let her win, but I made sure she knew it. We finished our games and I escorted her to the food counter. A few of my friends had spotted us. None of them had ever met Marcia before. I led the way, or perhaps Marcia lagged behind. In any case, she was following me, and so were a few guys. It was inevitable. I had even thought about it myself a couple of times. Some idiot behind us made a comment, the usual, "put a bag over her head" remark. I turned around and saw that Marcia had heard it. She looked like a kicked puppy. Despite being in law school and having some semblance of social grace, hearing that comment regressed me about 6 years. Honestly, I'd never been in a fight before. I had taken boxing lessons during my undergrad for a health credit, but that was the extent of it. Yet there I was, they were there, and Marcia stood there. So I did the only thing that came to mind. I shoved the jerk and snapped, "To hell with it." In medieval times, a knight would throw down a gauntlet. Where I grew up, that was the equivalent of "to hell with it." To my surprise, the guy and his friends backed off immediately. The one who made the remark raised his hands in surrender. "Sorry, man." He glanced at Marcia. "Really sorry." They quickly left. I glanced at Marcia and, holy shit, was I getting the look. That night, in that moment, I ceased to be Gary Blackwell. I became Sir Galahad. She looked at me like I had just slain a dragon, and with that look in that moment, she ceased to be the plain, pitiable ragamuffin I pitied. I wasn't completely certain yet. No, I wasn't quite there. But she was just a heartbeat away from being the one. Things started to change after that. And where am I now? Damn, I threw it all away for a girl I wouldn't have given a second glance under normal circumstances. I made it back just in time for Jamie's birthday. I found out they were holding it at the Fitzgeralds. No surprises there, and initially I was okay with it. Then I heard Marcia had a boyfriend, or rather someone she was seeing. He would be at the party too. Of course, I arrived at the party just before lunch. I had bought Jamie a set of books. He had shown interest in the Civil War, so I got him Shelby Foote's 3-volume military history. I had them wrapped up for a complete surprise. Sure, it was a lot to read, but books are books. Jamie had mentioned something about a drone once, but I brushed it off. I told him if he wanted another toy, he could save up and buy it himself. That's what I had said. After parking on the street, I walked up to the front door. In the past, I would have entered without hesitation, but things had changed since our issue. My issue. Standing at the door, I heard loud voices and shouting inside, recognizing my kids and some of Jamie's friends. I knocked, then knocked again. The second knock brought Alan to the door. He exclaimed, "Dad." Then, almost as an afterthought, he stepped back and repeated quietly, "Dad." "Hello?" I said. "Did you miss me?" He moved away slightly. "Mom's in the dining room." I reached out to lift him up, but he avoided me. "Sorry, Dad. Mom and Granddad." I felt something against my back. Was that a knife? "Oh, I see," I said. "Sure. You said the dining room." "Got it." He paled and jumped into my arms. "Dad!" I hugged him tightly, careful not to hurt him. Now I knew what was happening. I let him go and headed towards the dining room, but was stopped abruptly. There was another man, his arm possessively around Marcia's waist. Marcia's father looked pleased. I felt anger rising. Well, she hasn't wasted any time, I thought. By then the noise had ceased and everyone was staring at me. I reached back, grabbed Jamie's gift, and dove into the crowd. My sons, Meadow, my wife, Helen and her son, my in-laws, my wife's unmarried brothers, and this new man were all there, watching me closely. "Hi!" I shouted. "Just got back from the Bahamas." Meadow cried out, "Daddy!" and ran into my arms. I lifted her up. "How's my little angel?" She hugged me tightly, as usual. "Missed you, Daddy." She kissed my cheek. Then, as if suddenly alarmed, she pulled back. Had I missed some cue? She whispered urgently, "You should put me down," panic in her eyes. I put her down thinking, what in the world? Marcia extended her hand as if she were royalty, stepping forward. "Oh, hello, Gary. We didn't expect you to come." I responded, puzzled. "What? Jamie is our son. It's his birthday." I emphasized "our" a bit more. Marcia recoiled as if I had offended her deeply. She leaned against the man I assumed was her new partner. "Gary, this is Cullen Willoughby." I sized him up. I stood at a solid 6 feet and a well-built 200 pounds. He didn't outmatch me physically, but he did have Marcia by his side. I reached out my hand. "Nice to meet you." He shook my hand firmly. Likewise. We exchanged a brief, competitive handshake until I eased off to reduce the tension. He seemed to take it as a small victory. I glanced at Marcia. She seemed to think so too. I added, "So you're seeing my wife." He smiled at her, then at me. We've become friends. I looked back at Marcia but couldn't quite read her expression. Glancing around, I found Jamie's gift and held it out. "Brought you some books, Jamie." Jamie eagerly took the package and tore it open. His face lit up. "Shelby Foote," I grinned. "Yep." Ignoring me in the present, Marcia remarked, "Cullen got him a drone." I smirked. "A toy, how nice." No one caught the humor. Willoughby had to comment, "I hear you're the lawyer handling the case against Community Hospital. The one where the unmarried mother delayed taking her daughter to the hospital until it was nearly too late. They barely managed to save her, I hear." "Yeah, now she's almost blind." He remarked, "I heard. It's a shame she didn't seek medical help for her child sooner." I responded, "It's a shame she didn't have insurance." He continued, "I've heard that medical costs, doctor's fees, malpractice, insurance. They're all challenges we face today." I countered, "You think so? The kid's just a toddler. Do you think she cares?" He clarified, "Don't misunderstand me. I don't think the lawsuit was frivolous." I cut in, frustrated. "But it would have been cheaper to let the child go blind." "No, that's not what I meant," he hurriedly replied. I gracefully withdrew. "I'm sure you didn't, but medical expenses are high. The mother earns only $8 an hour. She'll never afford all the treatments her daughter will need," I added. "It's tough sometimes for parents without resources." He relented. "I didn't mean to imply her child shouldn't receive help. I just assume most people have some form of coverage these days." I smiled cynically. "Forget it. With the settlement we'll get, the child will be okay, and it'll help pay for my kid's college." From across the table, Mr. Fitzgerald muttered, "Ambulance chaser." "The scoundrel." Even his son seemed surprised by that remark. I couldn't let it pass. "You could have used one once." I regretted saying it immediately. I avoided eye contact with anyone. The comment hung in the air, heavy and unpleasant. Mrs. Fitzgerald appeared uneasy. She understood my implication, and deep down, she knew I was right. However, it didn't bring me any satisfaction. That was Marcia's cue. I couldn't believe her. "You missed the best part of the party." We've already sung, opened presents, and cut the cake. Want me to wrap up a piece for you? I glanced around at her parents, her brothers, Helen, Cullen, and back to Marcia. Despite whose children were here, and despite Marcia technically still being my wife, I realized I didn't belong here. I caught Jamie's eye in the crowd, gave him a stern look, and said, "Be careful with the drone, son." Glancing at my watch, I knew I had nowhere else to be, but staying at my own son's party wasn't an option. Well, I should get going. Lots of work to catch up on. I turned sharply and headed straight for the front door. Walking back to my car, my mind raced again. What I said was out of line. I knew that. But this? Marcia, with someone else. Where did he come from? And my kids. Her own father was influencing them against me. Why would he do that? I never thought Marcia would do something like this, but who knows? I messed up, and it looks like everything's changed. Reminds me of that old Willie Nelson song, "A woman's heart of gold turned to stone." As I reached my car, I heard someone call out from behind, "Dad, wait!" It was Jamie, out of breath as he caught up to me. "Dad, where are you going?" "Well, take me with you." He was right beside me now. I figured I wasn't getting anything to eat here, so I was heading to Denny's. "Good," he said, darting to the side door and jumping in. From inside, he urged, "Come on." I got in and started to say, "Shouldn't you?" "No," he interrupted. "Come on, let's go." I turned the key, started the engine, released the emergency brake, and we were off. The Denny's near my place was my original plan, but with Jamie along, I decided on the one by the mall down the road. Glancing at my son, I said, "Glad you're here, but your mom won't be happy." "So what?" he replied. "Jamie," I cautioned. He turned to face me directly, still not buckled in. "Look, you don't understand." I glanced from him to the road ahead. "Okay, but buckle up first." I watched as he complied. Good kid, I thought. "Dad, you just don't get it, and Denny's all right? Or maybe you'd prefer Ruby Tuesdays or something. How about Texas Roadhouse? I can get steak and ribs and they have peanuts." I chuckled. "Not very hungry, huh?" He settled back in his seat. Almost to himself, he muttered, "I've got a lot to tell you." I let the comment pass, and we continued to Texas Roadhouse in silence. Upon arrival, there was a waiting list, so I left my name and received an electric pager. Since the weather was decent, we opted to wait outside. I glanced at my son and asked, "All right, what's going on?" "That man and Granddad and Uncle Stephen," he whispered urgently. "They're all against you." I was intrigued. "Okay, what does that mean?" "The man wants Mom. Granddad and Uncle Stephen are helping him." I nodded, trying to process this. "Dad, I overheard him. He wants to marry Mom, move in with us, take over our house and everything." "You mean he wants to buy it?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, I think so. I don't know. He talked to Mom about it, not us." I felt sick to my stomach. This man had lost his wife, had 2 daughters, and now he wanted to start anew with my family. "Damn," I muttered. "What does he do for a living? Did he mention that?" "Yeah, he works in Richmond, but he travels to Baltimore a lot. He mentioned something about the Fed." I shuddered. "The Federal Reserve," I whispered. "Jamie, did he say Federal Reserve?" "That's it, Dad. He works for them." "Do you know what he does?" "The Federal Reserve Board manages our money supply. Their main offices are in Baltimore, but they have branches in Richmond, too." "Is he wealthy?" "He drives a Mercedes." I shrugged off the Mercedes. He might be. Government jobs pay well. Jamie was visibly upset. "Dad, I know what you did." "It was wrong. I was furious at first. Wilson and Allen still are. Meadow, she doesn't understand." Does your mother know how you all feel? Sort of. She knows we don't want to be around you. She knows I know what you did. She doesn't know the others do. How did they find out? I told them, Dad, I had to. I've been so angry with you, but you know. No, tell me, son, I want to understand. Our pager chimed its familiar melody. I began to rise, but Jamie restrained me, whispering urgently, Not yet. Wait, listen. I settled back down. Okay. Look, you're our dad. Yeah, you messed up, but we still need you. Mom needs you. Mom really needs you. Meadow needs you. Dad? Yeah? Dad, you've been away for a long time. You're staying at Aunt Helen's. Mom wanted you there so she could keep an eye on you. She talks to Aunt Helen every day. She knows everything about you. And yeah, she tracks your movements with GPS. Dad, you have to do something about that man. I understood why Marcia insisted I stay at Helen's, and I knew she was struggling with what I'd done. But the GPS tracking and this man. Son, what else do you know about this man? Grandpa likes him. Uncle Steve introduced him to us. Really? Yeah, he's a friend of one of Uncle Steve's. They spend a lot of time together. Grandpa is really angry with you. He says you're like some politician, someone named Jonathan Edwards. Who is he anyway? Grandpa thinks Mom should divorce you. I ignored Jonathan Edwards' question about what Mom said. Come on, Dad. We're Catholic. And besides what, Jamie? You know, about Mom's situation. She thinks, geez, son, it's been so long. She had surgery when she was a baby and a lot of procedures since then. Sure, her lip looked bright red when I first met her. But she's had so many cosmetic procedures since, it's hardly noticeable now. Dad, before what you did with that woman, Mom told us about you. You know, she told us what kind of person you were. I figured she had, and I'm not proud of who I was. What do you mean? She told us how great you were. How you were like Superman, how you took care of her, and how you made her love you, and all the nice things you did. Man, you must have been something. No kidding, she said I was pretty good? Dad, she loves you so much. You were like perfect. And then, well, now I think she sort of expects you to, you know. Just then, Jamie was interrupted. Mr. Willoughby had somehow found us. Damn it, the GPS. He walked towards where we were sitting. Jamie, your mother's worried about you. You just ran off. I saw my son's shoulders tense up. It's okay. I'm with my dad. Well, Willoughby said, she sent me out to bring you back. My son stood up. I don't need you to take me back. Dad can do that. I scrutinized Willoughby from head to toe. Yeah, I thought to myself. He'd love nothing more than to report back how I caused trouble. I turned to Jamie. You better let him take you back. Dad? No, go on now. I'm glad we had our talk. I leaned forward slightly. Keep our conversation between us, I winked. It'll be fine. Mr. Willoughby reached for my son's arm. Jamie recoiled. I'll go, but don't touch me. Willoughby glanced at me and muttered under his breath. Don't make her file a restraining order. I raised my hands, palms facing Willoughby. We're good. I turned to Jamie. I've got this, kiddo. Just stay calm, all right? Jamie gave Willoughby a sideways glance, then looked at me. Sure, Dad. As they drove off, Jamie asked me, Dad, who was Bonnie Tyler? I waved after them both, pondering, well, where did that come from? What did Marcia say to Jamie? What does Bonnie Tyler have to do with anything, and where did Marcia hear about her? What was I supposed to say? Damn, this was heavy. Damn, I mean goddamn. Double goddamn. Where did Bonnie Tyler come into this? Shit, she had been what I used to jokingly call a throwback, the fish too small to keep. Just some naive girl caught up in ideas about love and happily ever after, falling for the first guy who paid attention to her. Bonnie was exactly that. A skinny, flat-chested, unassuming girl I met in the library during my senior year of college. An English literature major working on a Defoe assignment when I stumbled upon her. A nobody. We dated for a bit. She fell hard. I could have had her, but couldn't bring myself to take advantage of someone so innocent. Funny enough, she reminded me a lot of Marcia, except for the lips. I let her down gently. Actually, I had this nerdy friend. I introduced them and, well, imagine me. Later, she called me her lucky charm, heard they got married. I reflected further. I needed to refocus. My own marriage needed saving. All right, we've scheduled 5 sessions. It's a start. After that, we'll reassess. No way anyone's taking my house. Willoughby's out of line if he thinks he can control my life. And as for Mr. Fitzgerald and young Mr. Stephen, they're both characters. I'll deal with them too. I skipped dinner. I returned the electric monitor inside, found my car, and headed back to Helen's. Received a call from my lawyer today. Marcia chose a counselor named Melody Whiting, a woman I'm supposed to address as Dr. Whiting. We'll have 1 individual session each, followed by 3 joint sessions. Wasn't expecting it to unfold this way between us. I was mistaken. Had my solo session with the counselor pretty much as anticipated. She asked the usual questions. Why are things as they are? What do I hope for? What steps am I willing to take? Do I understand Marcia? And so on. I spoke for about 20 minutes while she listened and jotted down notes. She mentioned I'd be informed about our upcoming joint sessions. As I left, I sensed she was somewhat dismissive. It made sense. She's aligned with Marcia. I hadn't imagined this would be straightforward. Today we had our first joint session, and it was a bit challenging. Marcia wasn't prepared to talk much, so I ended up doing most of the talking. She kept mentioning a headache and feeling nauseous, just wanting to leave. It's been how long now? I did my best. What more could I do? I can now apologize in 6 languages. I answered all the questions and tried to explain the inexplicable. How many times do I have to explain that I can't explain how it happened? Dr. Whiting seemed bored, especially with me. Maybe she and Marcia have figured things out and are struggling to break the news to me. Marcia seems to have made up her mind about something. Actually, I think she's decided not to decide yet, at least not definitively. I don't think she wants a divorce, but she doesn't seem to want me around at the moment either. It doesn't quite add up. But maybe she's gathering the courage to make a final decision. I'm willing to work things out, but is she? If only she would say something. I spoke with Helen last night. She thinks Marcia might be considering divorce, but there's something else she couldn't tell me. Apparently, this Willoughby person has been making progress. Marcia seems to be stalling. Helen mentioned the kids don't approve of Willoughby, which seems to only strengthen Marcia's determination. Helen also mentioned her father likes Willoughby and has never been more confident about anything. It got me thinking. Marcia's father works in law enforcement. His 2 sons are police officers, and the other 2 work in related fields. I always knew he was interested in my past. He was aware of my questionable track record and some minor college cases the whole time. Records of minors should be classified, but we both know how things really work. At that time, I was involved in car theft, even before I got my driver's license. In college, I mostly chased girls. My academic performance wasn't brilliant either. I've never broken any laws, but I've often found myself on the verge of trouble. However, my name appears in the documents. Investigations were conducted, and I was interrogated. Yes, he had many reasons not to want me around his daughter. I suppose 4 grandchildren, a big house, and the fact that she never had to work didn't matter to him. I remembered her father, that jerk. When Marcia and I first began dating, Mr. Fitzgerald, initially resentful, gradually withdrew. Looking back now, I realized that as long as I was taking Marcia to inconspicuous places, he kept his distance. However, after outings like bowling and when I started taking her to more public places, he became less friendly, more obstructive, always throwing up little barriers. He must have noticed the changes, first in me and then in Marcia. Fitzgerald being Irish, I always thought they were supposed to be passionate and quick-tempered. Quick to anger, but just as quick to forgive. Mr. Fitzgerald hasn't shown that side with me. He's been reserved, even cold, calculating, and always observant. It's the same with his wife. She seems like some sort of subordinate. Now that I think about it, no one is allowed to disagree with him. His views and methods are always the way. Damn, Marcia used to be like his little pet before I came into the picture. It was only then that she started showing some spirit. I stood up to him, and she was the only one who supported me. I remember feeling proud of her, and I could see she was proud of herself. My thoughts have been chaotic. That man treated Marcia poorly throughout her life, as if she were handicapped. He saw her as a gift to the church. But then I intervened. Helen told me Marcia believes I've been influencing the kids. I wish I could. I must admit my recent interactions with my kids during these visits haven't been great. Wilson and Olin seem withdrawn. Meadow is becoming distant. Jamie observes me silently, expecting something from me. I feel like there's something I should do, if only I knew what it was. Jamie and I exchange many texts using Meadow's phone where Marcia won't notice. Jamie is waiting for me to take action. I understand that much, though I'm unsure what exactly. I keep trying to apologize, but Marcia refuses to hear me out. Jamie gave me useful information. He revealed that his mom and this Willoughby often dine out together, maybe twice a week, which seems quite deliberate. Jamie mentioned his mom persuading him to choose between the Grotto or Olive Garden. The Grotto specializes in seafood, and of course there's Olive Garden. These were places we used to frequent. After thinking it over, I managed to call Jamie, which wasn't easy. We struck a deal. Every time Marcia and Willoughby go out, he'll text me their destination. Jamie strongly dislikes this man and wants me to come home. We're on the same page. Jamie is truly an exceptional kid. Jamie texted that they were going to the Grotto. I called ahead and confirmed their reservation, ensuring we would be seated nearby. I drove ahead and arrived at the restaurant just before the couple I was targeting. I observed as he assisted her out of his car, a gray Mercedes as expected, and escorted her inside. I followed suit. The restaurant was divided into several sections. They were in the largest room while I found myself in a smaller area nearby. It was unfortunate, but I lucked out with a window seat that offered a view of the parking lot. Realizing my original plan to disrupt their evening by eating conspicuously in front of them wouldn't succeed, I devised an alternate strategy. After a 10-minute wait, I called my waitress over. I pointed out where the suspected couple was seated and ordered from the appetizer menu: stuffed mushroom caps and half-shell oysters topped with imperial crab, dishes we used to enjoy together. I instructed the waitress to inform them that these were compliments from an old friend dining nearby. I wasn't sure how they would react to my gesture, but less than 10 minutes after placing the order, the waitress returned with the 2 plates. She informed me that the couple appreciated the gesture, but declined the gift. Less than 5 minutes later, I watched from my table as Mr. Willoughby helped my wife back into his car. I felt disappointed. I had hoped for more, though I couldn't define what exactly. Somberly, I assumed they would move on to a more welcoming restaurant. Still hungry, I finished the appetizers and followed with grilled salmon. To my relief, as I sat disheartened finishing my meal, I received a text message. It was from Jamie. Mr. Willoughby had just dropped off Marcia, and according to Jamie, Mom seemed upset about something. I replied with what I had done. Jamie responded quickly with UGD. Not being familiar with text abbreviations, I guessed it meant you go dad. It was reassuring to know I had one true ally. 2 nights later, Jamie informed me they were heading to the Outback Steakhouse. A new place. This time I arrived early and secured a seat near the entrance. Marcia spotted me as they walked in. She turned pale. They promptly left. An hour later, I received a text from Jamie. He had been grounded and had lost phone privileges. I recognized the sender of the text. It was Alan's phone. Ah, a new friend. Intercepting my wife and her dubious companion at restaurants was one thing, but I needed to do more. As mentioned earlier, Marcia volunteered at St. Tim's, our children's school. She arrived with Meadow and left when Meadow finished her day. It was time to increase the pressure. I showered St. Timothy's with various gifts, some for Marcia and several for the school itself. We weren't wealthy by any means, but I could afford a few things. I ordered new laptops for the secretaries who worked where Marcia hung her coat. It was only 4 computers, but she couldn't miss them. They were gifts from me. Marcia wasn't forgotten either. She loved roses, especially long-stemmed ones. My wife could be described as somewhat ethereal, if one could use that word as a noun. For one day each week, I made sure she received a dozen roses. On Monday, they were yellow with a card that said, "Friendship." Tuesday brought orange roses tagged with "Passion." Wednesdays were the classic red with "I love you." Thursday's blooms were pink, named after our children, and Fridays were white with a Lincoln-esque quote, "Love is eternal." I knew Marcia well. If she hadn't already known, she'd surely looked up the meaning of each color. Okay, I was pleading. What more could I do? On Saturday, while I was at Helen's mowing her lawn, a delivery man showed up with a large cardboard box. Inside were 60 roses, all squished and crumpled. At least I made an effort. Jamie purchased a disposable phone. We arranged to meet after school. When I arrived, Wilson was also there. Jamie began, "First things first. Meadow and Alan are clueless, but Wilson, we called him Will, and I know." I responded, "Okay, what do we know?" Jamie accelerated. "Mr. Willoughby's wife lives in Richmond. She left him for another man and took off with her daughters." I was already aware I had hired a private investigator. Jamie went on, "I don't think it's about money or their mom or anything like that. I think Mr. Willoughby just wants a new family. He has daughters. We've met them." Wilson interjected, "They're awful, Dad. They're both in high school and they're so full of themselves." "Don't call them awful, son." Wilson glanced at Jamie. "See? That's Dad for you." Jamie smirked at his brother. "He said you'd stick up for them." Then he continued, "Mr. Willoughby visits all the time now. Sometimes he brings his daughters, sometimes he leaves them at home. They tease Meadow, so she doesn't like them." I started. "They tease, not in front of Mom," Jamie added. Wilson mentioned, "They make fun of her about her room and things. You know, the stuffed animals and the clouds." I asked, "The clouds, Marcia?" "Yeah," Jamie added. "Painted on the walls." I completed his thought. Jamie continued, "They play Scrabble." "And he lets her win," I insisted. "She always used to." Wilson interjected, "Yeah, Dad. But this time she really beat you. He's smarter. He knows a lot more words." "Mom's been talking." I questioned. "About what?" Wilson explained. "He asks her things and she talks about you. She tells him how you used to never be home. You worked all the time. You never had time." I got frustrated. Damn it, that's not true. I came home every night. Sometimes I was late, but I always had a reason. Jamie added, "Mom said it was because you were out with the, I interrupted. "You know that's not true." Wilson smiled. "We know, Dad." Jamie glanced toward the parking lot. "Uh-oh, Mom." I turned and saw her approaching. I looked at my boys. "I guess this meeting's over." We had been sitting on the bleachers. They both jumped up and started running. In unison, they yelled, "See ya." I shouted back, "Yeah, soon." As my sons got into the car, I saw Marcia scolding them. I reflected on the information I had received. My sources had essentially corroborated the same story. Willoughby held a senior position at the Federal Reserve and earned a substantial income, but his wife had shirked her responsibilities. I wasn't entirely surprised about the wife. Teenage girls often exhibit significant antisocial behaviors aimed particularly at their mothers, and the stress could have overwhelmed her. Then there was the second part. She had found herself a younger, wealthier man. Willoughby wasn't some kind of predator. It might have been easier if he were. Instead, he was a victim himself, seeking solace. He clearly saw Marcia as someone compassionate and supportive, always willing to care for the vulnerable. He had found the perfect refuge: 3 well-adjusted boys, an adorable daughter, and a woman who found fulfillment in helping others. There was just one issue. It was my household. They were my sons. That was my lovely daughter, and the woman he desired was my wife. We had our second session. I felt utterly lost, as if everything I had or ever would possess was slipping away. No logical argument, no attempt to soothe, promise, or swear mattered. I tried everything. I pleaded, begged, cried, even knelt before her. I begged for her forgiveness, pleaded to return home, and vowed to dedicate my life to her happiness. It was like talking to a statue. Towards the end of our session, after 40 minutes of chilling silence, Marcia finally spoke. She said, I cannot and will not forget what you did. I do not forgive you, and I never will. She was speaking. I responded, I've said it 100 times. I love you. I made a mistake. I want to make things right. Can you at least say something else? Anything besides this refusal to forgive. She hit me hard. Fine. I'll say something. First, how can I trust what you're saying is true? You said this was the only time. How can I believe that? You work late often. You travel. You receive calls at odd hours and never tell me who they're from. Sometimes you come home smelling of perfume. Sometimes there's lipstick. My dad says you're always out. His police friends claim they've seen you with other women. My dad's right. You're a womanizer. You've never been honest with me. You're a cheater. I just never considered it until now. Shocked, I replied, Marcia, you know that's not true. Some of my clients are women. You know that. How many times have I come home nearly in tears because some desperate mother was at the hospital, hysterical about her child? My God, Marcia. You know how emotionally draining this last case has been. You even met the mother. You saw her hug and kiss me, thanking me for taking her daughter's case. That's not cheating. That's being a good lawyer. I was really upset, I began. Remember that elderly lady from the farm? Remember how that so-called businessman manipulated her into signing away her property, and how he lied? She stayed with us one night. She was so distraught. You must remember how she held on to me, crying on both our shoulders. Marcia, we won that case. You have to remember that. She wasn't paying attention. I tried again. Remember the college girl who almost lost her trust fund to that slick in-law? I told you how we outsmarted him and got her money back. You do remember. And you remember how we laughed about her propositioning me? She snapped. My dad said you took her up on it afterward. Marcia. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Gary? She continued, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. You told me she meant nothing, that what happened was meaningless. But it meant everything to me. It was my whole world, everything that mattered. She took a deep breath and went on. Gary, I love you. I've always loved you. I'll love you until the day I die. But you slept with someone else. You broke our vow. You committed adultery. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Confused and at a loss for words, I finally managed. Marcia, we can work through this. With a sharp slap, her hands hit the table. No, we can't. It's like the candy dish that broke that Easter. It shattered. We tried to glue it together, but it didn't matter. It was broken. This is broken. She gestured with her left hand, showing me her wedding rings. Then she stood up, thanked Dr. Whiting, and exited stage left. Dr. Whiting smiled at me. At least she spoke up. That's something in itself. I stared at her. I don't know what to do. I just don't. And I truly didn't. The doctor surprised me. Mr. Blackstone, your wife loves you, but there's something missing here. I've heard your story, how you met, the courtship, the struggles. I know you feel defeated, but perhaps it's time to stop apologizing and try something different. I asked. Like what? She regarded me as if I were clueless. You want her back. Try what has worked. I was bewildered. Sure, but how? She smiled knowingly. You're the knight here, not me. We shook hands and that was it. One final session, one last opportunity. Was that all there was? On the way home, I found myself on the verge of tears. Okay, I admitted I almost cried. But I was also deep in thought. What did I need to do? How could I win her back? What might actually work? What was the solution? I pondered our shared history. Wow, convincing her to marry me was quite a journey. It all started after that night at the bowling alley. I remember the comment made there had an unexpected impact on Marcia. The bag-over-the-head remark wasn't new to her. Even her brothers had used it on occasion. I sometimes wished I knew which ones. Getting her to accompany me to public places was challenging. I wasn't particularly skilled at any of the activities we tried, but I had a diverse range of experiences. We went roller skating, skiing, and fishing. Trips to the beach resulted in her fair skin getting sunburned, and we visited town carnivals, exploring all over. Sometimes I had to coax her out of the car, but I started feeling proud over time. Sure, people noticed her, often focusing on her lip, but they saw other aspects too. I made sure of it. It took some time, but not as much as one might expect. Eventually, she blossomed into a little extrovert, cheerful and lively. Marcia has always been beautiful, at least in my eyes. Others may not have seen it right away, but she grows on people. She's petite, well-proportioned, graceful, and very feminine. I'd say bubbly and radiant, if such a word exists. It should. And then she agreed to marry me. Brother, that was quite a struggle. First, I had to win her over. She had been set on becoming a nun. It took forever to convince her otherwise. And let me tell you that we never had any premarital intimacy. Not even caresses, just kisses and hugs. There were some church folks who seemed to interfere. I can't say for sure, but I suspect Marcia's dad may have been involved. Mr. Fitzgerald came from a large family, one of whom became a priest. I had a feeling Mr. Fitzgerald, his priest brother, and a parish sister who had known Marcia since childhood, tried to influence her, laying on the guilt about her destined life of service and such. Someone even suggested she needed counseling, though for what, I couldn't say. After each visit to the church counseling center, she'd become a bit distant, unsure of what she wanted. Once she agreed to marry me, despite the absurd idea, I had to confront her parents. Her mother surprised me. She was pleased. But her father, oh no. Mr. Fitzgerald presented every possible objection. She was too delicate, too frail. If she became pregnant, she might not carry the baby to term. He saw me as too much of a man, expecting too much, capable of hurting her both physically and emotionally. She still had lingering health issues requiring constant medical attention. True, she had a heart murmur as a child, but that was long past. He argued she wouldn't manage a household and would be taken advantage of by others. In his final argument, he angrily pointed out her dedication to the church, claiming I was usurping a gift she had committed to God. That was his strongest point, and I struggled to counter it. Finally, I struck a chord when I emphasized Marcia's natural inclination toward motherhood. Having children was essential to her fulfillment. Any other path would be a disappointment. That resonated with them. Marcia adored children and thrived around them. Victory seemed near. But he had one last card to play. He exposed my flaws, presenting my college scorecard and even casting doubt on my fidelity during our early dates. It was true. I had faltered. The game was up. He had exposed me. I remember seeing uncertainty in her eyes. It seemed like we were doomed. That was the moment Marcia took action. She sided with me. I was astonished, incredibly proud. She transformed into Boudica, warrior queen of the Iceni, Andarta, Celtic goddess of war. I can still hear her saying clearly, "I don't care. I love him. He's a fighter like you, Dad. I'm going to marry him. He's everything I want. I want to have his children, a grand wedding with a long white dress, a veil, rings, bridesmaids, a ring bearer, a flower girl, and a big reception with an open bar. Yes, I want an open bar so I can drink champagne. I want to throw the bouquet. I want it all, every bit of it. I want the whole show." Then she looked at me and added, "And I want our honeymoon to be at Niagara Falls." And that's exactly what we did, every bit of it. Now, what should I do? I feel so lost and confused. What is my next step? Can someone please guide me? Well, it had to happen the third and final session. It was initially set for the week after the second one, but I needed more time. Dr. Whiting and Marcia agreed to wait. Meanwhile, it was becoming increasingly difficult to connect with my children. Helen told me Meadow had learned about what happened and turned against me. Alan found out from Meadow, and that's how I lost him. Jamie and Wilson were still around, but I could feel the change. Wilson had taken a liking to Willoughby, and even Jamie started mentioning how helpful he was with Mom. I was losing my family. Marcia loved me. I knew that, but it seemed she couldn't or didn't want to forgive what I had done. She had support, that was certain. Her dad and Willoughby were solid allies. It occurred to me that even if we reconciled, the past would never fade for her. I'd be forever apologizing, a role I wasn't cut out for. Then there were the kids. As it stood, my relationship with them was slipping away. Marcia was right. Our family dynamic was broken. If I wanted to remain close to my kids, I needed to redefine our relationship. Willoughby could have Marcia. He needed her and could step into the father role. I would step back, becoming a more distant figure, a father who had let everyone down but remained a phone call away if they needed something. It seemed like the only option. Then there was one final consideration. Marcia was devoted to her Catholic faith and wouldn't entertain the idea of divorce. I loved her too much to see her trapped in sadness and resentment for decades. With Willoughby in the picture, it seemed wisest to let her go. Perhaps she would move on and find happiness with someone else, maybe even the government guy. And so I made my decision. If she wouldn't seek a divorce, I would initiate it. I made a call and managed to secure another brief extension. This time I was informed it would be the final one. No more delays. I agreed. I went to confession for the last time and confessed to the priest that I was leaving the church. Naturally, the decision to end things with Helen had to be addressed. I sat her down and explained that I would be moving out. When she asked where I would stay, I told her the truth. I was leaving the Richmond law firm to start my own practice. She chuckled, but I didn't find it amusing. Next, I contacted the lawyer who had guided me into my current predicament. It wasn't entirely his fault, but I knew who was ultimately to blame. Despite this, I wasn't pleased with his remarks, so I dismissed him. I found another lawyer online and laid out all the details. I had made up my mind. Finally, it was time for the conclusive meeting. I arrived with documents in hand, ready for the decisive moment. I had resolved to face it head-on, whether it meant triumph or defeat. The day of reckoning came. This meeting, similar to the uncomfortable atmosphere of the previous sessions, was scheduled for late afternoon, just as before. Promptly on time, armed with paperwork, I waited calmly in Dr. Whiting's reception area. Everything was prepared. Earlier that morning, I had obtained the divorce papers from my new lawyer and packed my few personal belongings from Helen's place the night before. All that remained was to hand Marcia the documents, Whether she accepted them or not, if she allowed it, I would bid her farewell and settle my accounts with the doctor. Either way, she would get what she wanted, but under my conditions. I sat silently and waited. The terms we had drafted were more than fair. The house, her car, child support, alimony, health care coverage, a generous personal allowance, emergency funds, and a new contact number if she needed to reach me directly. So, I waited. Was I content? Far from it. I was miserable, but I knew we couldn't continue as we were. It was the only option left. 20 minutes behind schedule, Dr. Whiting emerged. "Mr. Blackwell." I stood. "Yes. Please come inside." I followed her, not to our usual meeting place, but to her private office. Once seated, she said, "I'm sorry. Mrs. Blackwell called a few minutes ago. She won't be able to make it." "Did she reschedule?" I asked. "No," replied Dr. Whiting. She say anything? "We need to reschedule. We have to finish these sessions." Dr. Whiting's expression turned blank. "No, she said she wasn't coming back. When I reminded her of your arrangement, she didn't care. She said she wasn't coming back." Feeling caught off guard, I pondered. What should I do? I frowned at the doctor. I suppose I should call my lawyer, have him contact hers, reschedule. Noticing the folder in my hand, Dr. Whiting inquired, "I see you have something there. May I ask?" "Yes, of course, I give up. She's won. These are divorce papers. I guess I'll need to hire someone to serve her." Dr. Whiting fidgeted with a letter opener and some papers on her desk. "Yes, I suppose," she said, standing up. "I'm sorry." We both walked to her office door. She opened it to let me out. "I don't want to assume, but you're still legally separated. There are no restrictions. You could see her, serve her yourself." Glancing at the papers in my hand, I replied uncertainly, "I don't know." "You don't have to give them to her," Dr. Whiting suggested. "You could visit, just keep the papers handy, or leave them in your car." Eyeing my paperwork, I considered. "I suppose I could do that." Dr. Whiting attempted a smile. "Keep in touch." I shook her hand. "I'll keep you informed." So I left the doctor's office and returned to the street. What now? I imagined Helen had kept Marcia informed. She knew I had packed up, that I was leaving. What did she think? That I would hang around, cry, and beg for one last session and then do nothing? Reaching my car, I got in, started it, and pulled out. My stomach churned with nerves. It was a tense, white-knuckled drive to my former home. Jamie and Wilson, taking the bus, were already there when I arrived. Marcia would be home soon. I went up and knocked on the door. After a brief wait, Jamie appeared. "Dad," he said, looking surprised, "should you be here?" "I need to see your mother. She's not home yet." Jamie seemed unsure of what to do. "Look, I'll wait outside." I gestured towards my car. He looked scared, on the verge of tears. He nodded reluctantly. "Okay." As I started back down the driveway, he called after me, "You know, Mom's really been struggling. She cried all night." I glanced back. "I know." Jamie stood at the door, silent. I wondered where Wilson was. Waiting by the car, it didn't take long. Marcia pulled up. I stepped out. Meadow and Alan emerged from her car, spotted me, started towards me, then hesitated. Meadow rushed forward, Alan following. Meadow threw herself into my arms. "Daddy, Daddy, come home. Please don't leave." She wasn't crying, but one wrong word from me and... So I held her tight, kissed her, and said, "That's never been up to me." Alan stood beside us. "Hi, Dad." I tousled his hair. "Hi, Alan, you doing okay?" "Okay, I guess. Mom's been crying a lot." I looked across to Marcia in the car, gripping the steering wheel, staring ahead. I set Meadow down, knelt beside them, and said, "You two go inside the house." Eyes wide, they nodded and hurried to the front door. Jamie held it open for them. I walked over to Marcia, tapped on the window. She looked at me. Was it fear, anger, sorrow in her eyes? "Marcia, this is it. We need to talk." She looked away, face in hands. Through the glass, I couldn't tell if she was crying. "Marcia," I insisted, "open the door and come out." She peered out again, tears brimming in her eyes, filled with fear. Through the window, she uttered, "Step away from the door." I complied. She emerged, but gripped the door handle tightly. "Helen mentioned you were leaving." God, I thought. This is it. What do I say now? I replied, "That's correct." She slouched against the car door, its surface smeared with road grime. She wore a pastel sheath dress, a subtle gold with a hint of light brown. It suited her well. She looked beautiful but weary, shadows beneath her eyes indicating recent tears. We stood inches apart. I raised my left hand slightly. "Don't lean back like that, you'll get dirt on your lovely dress." She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I held her as she regained her composure. Stepping back, she stood tall, jaw firm, shoulders squared. "I told Dr. Whiting I couldn't make it today." I sensed her resolve returning swiftly. Had the moment passed? "I understand," I responded. With confidence regained, she asserted, "You shouldn't have come here." For a fleeting moment, I believed there was a chance, but now— "I have something for you," I said, turning towards my car to retrieve the package. She took a step towards me, then halted. "No. Wait." I turned back to face her, saying nothing, waiting. She knew what was in store. What would she decide? Was this the end, right here on our front lawn? Like a statue, she stood firm. "I'm pregnant." I knew it. I had my suspicions from the first counseling session when she mentioned feeling unwell. Her appearance at the second session confirmed it. She was now wearing loose clothing. They say pregnant women have a certain glow, a kind of extra moisture or oil. Marcia had it. She always had. 4 times before, and now again. I responded, "I think I figured it out during our first session." She looked puzzled for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I suppose you would have. Why didn't you—" I cut her off. "This has been about you, not me. What do you need?" She sighed. "Can you come back tomorrow? I'm really tired. I need to—" I interrupted gently. "No, I won't be back tomorrow. But here's what I'll do, I'll help you get settled. I'll tuck you into bed. Then I'll fix something for the kids to eat. Later tonight or tomorrow, we can figure everything out." She nodded, clearly exhausted. I guessed she'd been up all night. Putting my arm around her shoulder, I guided her up the sidewalk and into the house. Jamie, Wilson, and the others were waiting inside. "Help me get your mom upstairs," I instructed. They followed silently as I half-carried her up the steps. Once in our bedroom, I prepared the bed and helped her out of her dress and bra, then settled her in. As I went to close the curtains, she whispered, "I just need some sleep. I'll be okay soon. You'll wait, won't you?" Turning back, I replied gently, "I'll be downstairs." Closing the door softly behind me, I headed downstairs. As soon as I reached them, they bombarded me with questions. Wilson spoke first. "Aunt Helen called and said you were leaving." Jamie added, "She said you were going to divorce Mom." Alan and Meadow watched quietly. Then Alan spoke up. "Mom was crying all night. She called Granddad and Granddad came over. They had a big argument." "Good news?" I thought aloud, smiling with a hint of relief. "Mom needs a break. How about pizza and a movie?" Meadow exclaimed, "Frozen." Jamie frowned. "We all have homework." I brushed him off. "Not tonight." Wilson rolled his eyes. Alan looked puzzled. "How about Maleficent?" I suggested. Jamie's frown disappeared. "Okay." Alan grinned widely, Wilson shrugged, and Meadow chirped, "Great." So I ordered 3 large pizzas. We watched Maleficent, then an old John Wayne movie I liked. As I was about to put in another John Wayne film, I realized everyone else was asleep, so I got them all to bed. The next day was a school day, but I had told them not to worry about homework since we were taking the day off. There were no arguments. After getting my kids settled, I checked on Marcia. She was sound asleep, so I grabbed a pillow and blanket, went back downstairs, and curled up on the sofa. As I closed my eyes, I made a silent promise. Tomorrow this nightmare would end one way or another. I woke up to the aroma of fresh coffee. Glancing at the end table, I saw the source. Marcia was sitting across the room. "Jamie told me you let the kids skip school today," she remarked. I let the blanket fall to the floor and turned around, allowing my feet, still in shoes, to touch the ground. "That's correct," I said. She inquired, "Would you care to explain why?" "Not until I've had some of this coffee." I lifted the mug and took a satisfying sip. It was hot. I murmured, "That's good." Marcia repeated, "Are you ready to explain now?" "Sure, why not? It's a beautiful day. The sun is shining, not a cloud in the sky." She interrupted me. "How would you know? You just woke up." "I checked the weather forecast last night. It's supposed to be a perfect day, so—" She tried to interrupt again. "Shut up." "No," I cut in. "You shut up. We're all going to freshen up and get dressed, except for me. I'll be wearing what I have on now. Then we're all going for a drive." "A drive? And where exactly do you plan to go?" "Down I-81 to the Luray Caverns to start. If we have time, we'll continue to the museum near VMI. If not, we'll spend the night at a Hampton and do it tomorrow. We might even stop at the Normandy Memorial in Bedford. Did you know?" She cut me off. "You've got it all figured out, haven't you?" I nodded. "Uh-huh." "Well," she said as she stood up, "you're not even supposed to be here." I leaned back and countered, "But here I am." She retorted, "I think you should leave now." I took another sip of coffee. "Maybe you should come over here and sit down." She became confrontational, arms akimbo. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call." I preempted that, pointing to the space next to me on the sofa. "Come over here and sit down." "What?" "You heard me. Come over." "I will not." I started to get up to fetch her. I said. She reluctantly came over and perched on the edge of the sofa. "What do you want?" I replied, "No, Marcia. The question is, what do you want?" "I want you to leave." I retorted, "That's not what I meant," as she began to speak. But I continued. "From where I stand, you have 3 choices. 1, you can save your family, let me raise our children with you, and give our 5th child the father he or she deserves. 2, you can insist I leave, but then you'll receive the paperwork from the car, and that will truly be the end. Or 3, you can pretend to still despise me, but then you'll never forgive me while drowning in self-pity. And I won't allow that last option." "You think highly of yourself," she shot back. "I don't think." "I know," I replied. "I know I'm the father of 4 children, soon to be 5. I know I'm your husband. I know you love me. And I know I'm flawed." She was seething. It was satisfying to see. "You believe you can just waltz in here after what you've done and dictate terms to me?" "I have, and I just did," I stated. "So, what's your decision?" She sat there silently, staring at me. After what I deemed an appropriate pause, I stood up and said, "I'll go fetch the paperwork." She rose and stood in my way. "You betrayed me. You broke our vows. You lied to me." "I did betray you. I broke our vows. I committed adultery, and I lied to you about the car incident," I admitted. "I've apologized endlessly, and I've sworn never to repeat those mistakes. Now, if you'll step aside, I'll get the papers and we'll conclude this. I took a step to the side and faced her once more. You think I can forgive you and everything will return to normal? And why assume the baby I'm carrying is yours anyway? I paused, placing my hands on her shoulders. You're a Christian. Forgiveness should come easier. But no, things can't go back to how they were. However, we can move forward, either together as a family or separately. As for our fifth child, I know they're mine because I know you. And I remember when it happened. So what will it be? A fresh start where we mend what's broken, or a clean break for good? I sidestepped towards the door again. This time, she didn't try to stop me. It seemed like it really was the end. Just as I reached for the door, I heard her speak softly. Maybe we could start at Harper's Ferry and spend a week there. I paused, my hand on the door handle. The following days unfolded differently. We began at Harper's Ferry and stood at the Jefferson Stone. We visited Bedford to see the D-Day Memorial, explored Luray Caverns and the VMI Museum, and concluded with a stroll to the Natural Bridge. Jamie brought along the Shelby Foot book I had given him, and we looked up the section about the VMI battle, sharing laughs over the many movies that depicted it in various ways, even getting Marcia to join in. As for Marcia and me, our plans started with borrowing her dad's minivan. She went to fetch it, and despite my initial intent to stay outside, I insisted on accompanying her. No one emerged when she went inside to retrieve the keys, not her grandparents or anyone else. I have to admit, I was ready for an argument. Each night we stayed either at a Hampton or a Marriott, ensuring a good breakfast each morning and fresh sheets every night. We booked 2 rooms, one for the boys and another for Marcia, Meadow, and me. I had to intervene a couple of times on the first night to keep the boys in check. We spent 4 nights and 5 days away. School wasn't a concern, our activities took priority. Each night we stayed in rooms with either 2 queen or king-sized beds. The first night, Marcia and Meadow shared a bed while I slept beside them. The second night, Marcia, exhausted from walking, lay with me while I massaged her back and swollen belly. The third night mirrored the first, but this time Marcia let me listen to our baby's heartbeat and feel the movements. On the final night, after I massaged her, Marcia and I cuddled closely, exchanging hugs and light kisses. Throughout our stay, Meadow never attempted to join us in bed. She spent time with the boys each day, possibly discussing their conduct in the evenings. No one brought up our recent difficulties. Upon returning home, we put the children to bed, and Marcia and I had a conversation. She began, "Gary, I don't think I can ever forgive you. You've hurt me deeply." I replied, I know I've hurt you. I've apologized and begged to come back home for so long. But I understand now. I'm flawed. I'm imperfect. I broke the dish. It can't truly be repaired, but it can be replaced. You're asking for a lot, Gary. I don't know. I do know, Marcia. We're Christians, sweetheart. She tried to cut in. Don't call me. I interrupted her, saying, You're my sweetheart. Nothing can change that. Now, where was I? We're people of faith. God forgives. We may not be divine, but we strive to emulate. Jesus offered eternal life to a criminal on the cross. Peter denied him 3 times, yet Jesus forgave him. Marcia, what did Jesus say and do? She remained silent, so I continued. Jesus found Peter fishing. He asked 3 times. Do you love me? Peter affirmed each time. Jesus forgave him for his denials. I failed, Marcia. If you can't forgive me and let me come home, then I have to leave. Is that what you want? Do you want me to leave so you can marry Cullen Willoughby? She rolled her eyes and replied, Maybe if you came home and stayed downstairs. I countered firmly, No. If I come home, I'm sleeping with my wife. She hesitated. You wouldn't. You couldn't. I assured her, If I come home, it's all or nothing. I want my family, my house, my wife, and the love and intimacy of marriage. She mumbled, Well, I guess, I insisted. No guessing, Marcia. If we're in, we're all in. I'll probably still get mad at you, she admitted. I'd expect that, I conceded. I'd be surprised if you didn't. I guess I'll need to talk to Cullen. Yes, I agreed. You will. He'll be disappointed. This is about my family, not his. You're my wife, I reminded her. And your parents. She cut me off. I've sorted that out. Are you sure? Yes. What about your brother Stephen? I'll handle him. Good. I'll call Dr. Whiting and settle the legal fees. You'll never... she started. I interrupted gently. No, never. You can count on it. I took her hand in mine. It was time to start anew. We headed upstairs to our bed. A few weeks later, our fifth child arrived, a little girl. We named her Maria Elizabeth, honoring a saint known for forgiveness and the mother of John the Baptist. While I love all my children dearly, I must confess that Maria Elizabeth holds a special place in my heart. As for Marcia and me, our journey has not been easy. I wasn't just Marcia's husband. I was her Prince Charming who had caused significant hurt. It's been some time now and we're still working through it, but we have our children, and, most importantly, we have each other. And as for myself, I needed to step up and embrace my responsibilities. I had to define my principles and be prepared to stand firm, whatever the outcome. Through this, I discovered aspects of courage beyond the obvious, the courage of everyday choices and commitments. I never faced blazing buildings or wore a uniform, never fired a gun or marched off to battle. Yet I had to confront my fears and take risks to achieve what I wanted, and I succeeded. I consider myself fortunate to have had a loving wife by my side, and that's about it. Take care.